Can you imagine if your money actually made more money than you did? Hey there, I'm Chris Peach from MoneyPeach.com and OneAZ Credit Union, and I want to show you how compound interest helps you build wealth over time to the point where your money actually can produce more money than you do. So what is compound interest and how does it work? Well, compound interest is the interest you earn from the amount you invested, which is called the principal amount, plus the interest your investment earns. Yes, this sounds confusing, so another way to think about compound interest is interest on top of interest. Now, before we dive too far in, let me explain the difference between simple interest and compound interest. Simple interest is the amount of interest your savings earns on just the initial deposit, which we call the principal amount of the investment. For example, if someone deposits $5,000 into an account that earns 10% simple interest for 5 years, the total interest earned is $500 every year or $2,500 for 5 years. Now, of course, simple interest isn't too shabby. However, there's no contest when compared to compound interest. That's because compound interest is simple interest plus the interest your simple interest amount earns. Remember, think interest on top of interest. So when we take the same $5,000 and we deposit it into an account that earns 10% interest compounded each year, the amount of your return goes from $2,500 to just over $3,000. Now, that little bit of money isn't bad at all, but where the magic really comes into play for compound interest is when we add more time. So let's take a look at simple interest versus compound interest for the same $5,000 at 10% over 10 years, 20 years, and even 30 years. Now, simple interest over 10 years results in $10,000, where the interest compounded for 10 years is just under $13,000. At 20 years, simple interest results in $15,000, where compound interest for the same amount over 20 years is more than double at almost $34,000. But when you go a full 30 years, simple interest results in $20,000, where compounded interest for 30 years goes up more than 77% to $87,000. Remember, $5,000 either turned into $20,000 with simple interest or just over $87,000 when the interest is compounded for 30 years. Can you imagine if they would have taught you about this in high school? Okay, now let's move back into some real world examples. I promise whether you're into numbers or not, you're going to be excited about these. Now, you've probably heard of the S&P 500 before, but just in case you're not completely sure what it is, the S&P 500 is the benchmark for how the stocks perform in the United States. Now, when looking back from 1957 to the end of 2022, the S&P 500, also known as the market, has averaged an annual return of 10.82%. But for easy math purposes, let's just use 10%. Now, this is where that number gets really interesting. If you take an average salary in the state of Arizona of $53,000, and then you set aside 15% of that amount for wealth building, you'll be setting aside just about $8,000 every year. And if you set aside $8,000 for wealth building every year from age 25 to age 65 and get a 10% rate of return, get this, you will enter retirement with $3.7 million. And remember, this is without factoring in a raise during the entire 40 years. But you may be thinking, this is too good to be true, or wondering about future recessions or dips in the economy and the stock market. Well, the truth is, those things will absolutely happen, and they have happened in the past. But even with all the ups and downs in the economy over the past 75 years, the average return of the market is still over 10%. But just to be safe, let's assume we're half wrong. Well, then you end up with only $1.3 million in retirement. Either way, you win with compound interest. Alrighty, my friends, thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, do me a favor, hit the like button, drop me a comment, and share this video so we can help as many people as possible make better decisions with their money.